So thank you that some people show up. I think we're still waiting for a few people, but I think we can start because I want to start with recapping briefly what we did yesterday and then going on to the things we are talking about today. So let's go back to the idea here. The idea is really that we're starting with sort of looking at not just dyads or how a node is central because it's connected with a lot of nodes, but whether the nodes you connected with are themselves connected or not. Yeah? So and that's what's called triads. So you're looking at triadic structures in your network. And so the level of analysis still, what we're actually interested in the end is individual level, although some of the stories are actually more about the group level, how the network looks as a whole rather than the individual level. So we talked about social capital. Just to recap on social capital, why did we look at, well, this is the end result that we want to come to today as well. It's basically which person is better positioned. But we started with talking about social capital, and the idea there was that we sort of wanted to mention that there are different ways in which people have defined social capital. First of all, do they define it as networks, or do they define it as more like shared norms, shared ideas? We talked about the idea that, well, capital, social capital is sort of in the same list of capitals as cultural capital, human capital, financial capital, you know, all these things that have the capital at the end, but many of these capital, economic capital or something like that, but many of these capitals are really something that you can assign to a person, whereas social capital is more complex because it's not necessarily a person that has it. It could be a community that has it, or it could be that it's your relationship with someone else where this social capital is embedded in. So you can't really say that you own your social capital because it's not something that you can put either in your head or in a box or something like that. We also talked about the idea that maybe social capital, you know, what is social capital? When is it social capital? When is it not? Goldman talking about the chair, you know, if a chair has legs and you can sit on it, that means it's a chair, otherwise it's not a chair. And the idea that maybe, you know, maybe there's some tautology there. That, you know, you sort of ad hoc, so sorry, post hoc. So after you find the results, you say, oh, I measured social capital because I found positive outcomes, or I didn't measure social capital. I measured something else, like social liabilities. We also saw that social capital can be good for an individual, but not for a group, or for a group, but not an individual. And so we need to be careful about what we see as social capital, because it really depends on what we're focusing on. And then the idea that it has some active returns or high returns, sorry, you can think about this as sort of active investment, something you do on purpose. You know, you build your network in order to benefit from that, or it's just a side product of having friends, and these friends are the people that you know, and these people have good or bad, you know, resources, good resources, and that makes you then have more possibilities for social capital. Okay, so I just wanted to mention that because, as I said, social capital has been used quite a bit. I would say around the end of the 1990s, beginning of 2000, that was really the sort of hype. You know, but when you read it, it's sort of like, but what this author says or what this author says is completely something different when it comes to social capital. So then we went on to say, okay, let's look at some basic principles that are working in social networks, and let's really focus on triads, so groups of 3 people. And so the first starting point was sort of general balance theory, right? And so an imbalance happens when if I believe something, you believe something else, and it's really important for us that as friends we believe the same thing, then we are in an imbalanced situation. Yeah, so you're a Joe Biden supporter, I'm a Trump supporter, we're friends, difficult situation. Yeah? And so there are two ways of getting into balance. Either you start hating a person or disliking a person because they're different, or you influence the other person or they influence you, and you sort of get towards a converged view about what is good and what is bad. Notice that we're sort of having a world where there's only friends and enemies, there's nothing in between. Okay, and so if we look at this from a network perspective, evolution of a network, what we could have is, if we start off with 6 nodes, where some nodes have, are Trump supporters, some are Joe Biden supporters. As the election goes nearer, what might happen is that the Joe Biden supporters start building friendships, the Trump supporters start building friendships. They stop being friends if they're different in opinion, because it becomes more salient. So it becomes more problematic. And not only that, but there might also be social influence, actually social contagion. Your opinion is being impacted by the opinion of your friends. Social contagion is a concept that's been used widely also in educational research to look at, for example, school kids, and whether if their friends commit crime, they're more likely to commit crime, or whether if their friends smoke, they start smoking. So smoking and friendship, and crime and friendship, small crime, of course, has been some of the topics that have been looked at when it comes to social contagion. If you're interested in this, I can always give you some references on that as well. Yeah. Okay, now Hyder's balance theory is going further than this. Hyder's balance theory is not concerned with attitudes of people, it's concerned with our relations with others and whether we have a positive or negative attitude towards a person rather than towards, sorry, did I say attitude towards people? Attitudes towards things. So general balance theory is attitudes towards things. Hyder's balance theory is about attitudes towards people. So basically how we relate with each other as a group of 3. So I mentioned yesterday, probably you remember situations where you were friends with each other, with one person and you disliked the friends that they had, or you had 2 friends and they disliked each other. Okay, now there's 2 ways of getting balance. One is to build friendships among the 3 of them. And so yesterday, someone was referring to the fact that maybe Stan is negotiating between Eric and Kyle to build friendships. That's one way. The other way is that Stan gets convinced by Kyle that basically Eric is really not such a nice guy, and so starts really disliking Eric as well because of the treatment towards Kyle, for example. We should probably at some point come back to the fact that we're talking about 2 different things. One is behavior, how you treat other people. The other one is attitudes, how you think about other people. So we need to come back to, what is it exactly that we would measure? What are the type of ties that we could consider? But at the moment, we sort of not differentiating that much between them. Okay, and so if we add this process to the whole thing, then, it might be that we really get into subgroups, where these subgroups are positive ties within and negative ties between. So there's like a dislike of the other group and a like of the own group, and sort of might reinforce each other. That's a balanced situation here, a very balanced situation. And so you could think about this as echo chambers, right? So it's sort of like this situations where you have multiple groups of people that just reinforce each other's ideas and think that the rest of the world is bad. So that's the type of thing. Okay, so then we moved away from positive and negative ties, and we talked about strong and weak ties. And so Granovetter's strength of weak ties starting point is, if you think about 2 of your good friends, they are likely to at least know each other. They're also above chance likely to be friends with each other, but at least knowing each other. So the forbidden triad principle is the idea that if you have two good friends, they should not be unconnected. And if we take this in an absolute way, it's actually a probabilistic way, because as we know, if you think about your world, you might have friends from when you were a kid, you might have friends now, they might actually not know each other because there's sort of different worlds that you lived in at different times in your life. But if we take this as an extreme, we could sort of build a structure. So when we talk about Britney Spears having friends, so they need to be connected with each other. Britney Spears having a weak connection with the hairdresser, that's a weak connection, so there's nothing that has to happen there. Ken Pavis also having other weak ties, nothing happening there. But Ken Pavis having two good friends, having a strong connection there, weak connection with Eva Longoria, strong connections from Eva to Tony, Felicity and Nicolette, and so connections having to be built there. And so if you look at the structure here, if we follow the strength of weak ties, the forbidden triad principle, what is happening is that you can see that there's clusters, social circles that are emerging. And these social circles are among people that they're closed, and they sort of are built by this friendship, strong connections, right? Whereas it's the weak connections that link between social circles. And it's because there's a forbidden triad principle that these have to be weak connections. Because if this would be a strong connection, then there would be a connection here that has to be emerging and a connection here emerging. And so you end up with one simple group. Okay. And we talked about that might be useful for thinking about where to get a job, where to find out if a new apartment is available and somewhere in Trento and these sort of things. Very easily transferable information can flow through weak network ties. However, when it comes to things that are more difficult to transfer, things which require time and effort from the other person, then it's the strong ties that are going to be more important because they're more motivating for people. So if you need support at the middle of the night, it's your friends, good friends that can give you that. It's not, your hairdresser. It's logical, but still, that's an important aspect. So Granovetter's strength of weak ties is about the strength of the weak ties in transferring information between social circles. And because friendship tends to be based on similarity characteristics, homophily, think about opinions, but also think about characteristics. So sometimes it might be gender, it might be age, it might be the type of job you do. All of these things might have an impact on your tendency to build ties. There's a tendency for homophily, so for friendship ties to be more likely to emerge between people that are similar. Because of that, what you have is these social circles tend to be also quite, similar in who are in there, on whatever characteristics are relevant. So in this case, the sort of, here are the singers, here are the hairdressers, here you could say are the actresses, and maybe there's like a group of basketball players. If you think about Tony Parker having, good friends and so on, maybe you could think about it. Okay. So then we move towards Simmel, and Simmel talking about, well, actually, if you think about networks, triads are really important. Why are they important? They're important because they make you do things that you wouldn't do if you're in a dyad. Because you can build coalitions, you can have groups of people working together to force someone that they're both connected with to do the things that they believe or what they want to achieve. So I talked about this idea of, if you have one person that you're doing exams, you're in the middle of exam period, one person knocking on your door, let's have a drink, You might be like, if you have two people and they're both, they're both friends of you and they're connected with each other, they're sort of both at the door, you might be more inclined to do that. Why? Because there's group pressure. And the idea is because there is sort of a group of people now. It's not just one person. So the balance is you have a group of people against you. And because everyone has the same sort of status to start off with, that has a big impact on you. Yeah, because it's a power of numbers, so to speak. Okay, so that's one thing we talked about as well. And then we said, okay, so let's now go back to our question. So who is better off here? And so, as I said, it's not that there is one best answer, because there's going to be three answers. The first answer is basically you're better off in this situation. And that's to do with social capital as a group, sort of group level characteristic. It's sort of like more related with Putnam as well and Bowling Alone and these type of arguments. Also James Goldman's argument. The idea that, if you're connected, if you're a cohesive group, then that means that you can control others. You can control those that are not doing what the group wants. You can control those that do not follow the norms, the rules. And, the classic idea I always think about is sort of the American suburbs, where, everyone is just checking everyone else that they follow the rules. So that's sort of James Goldman's view, I would say. So it's this sort of everyone checking that everyone else follows the rules, and that makes sure that nobody is doing strange things, that everybody follows these rules. Now, that could be a good thing. Could be a good thing because it makes sure that nobody is going to do something that's not beneficial for the group, that's going to go against what everyone in the group was sort of aiming for. So there's no free riders, there's no antisocial behavior, there's no crime, these sort of things. It also implies that there's control, or it also implies that there's trust, because if there's trust, there's sort of, if there's control, then there's sort of trust. It's not completely right, because trust should actually be a situation where you do not have control. You open yourself up for vulnerability, that's trust. Control is where you have control over things, so that things are not going to go wrong because you know you have control over it. So there's a little bit of a distinction between that. So in the trust literature, you talk about trust as something like, I'm exposing myself. And it could go wrong, but I trust that the other person is not going to do that. But if that's the case, if there's control, there's actually a book on control and trust, if you're interested in that. If that is the case, that there is control, that means that I don't have to monitor all the time whether someone is going to backstab me. Yeah? So because I have this trust in this situation. And we also talked about the companies, right? So if I'm working with you, we are two companies, and I rely on you to deliver some product, and I give you already some money, and you might run away with this money. Of course, we build a contract, but it's always hard for a contract to be checked and that everything is correct. So what can I do, or what can be the situation if I work with other people, other organizations, other companies that also work with you? There's more control I have, because I know if you're going to mistreat me, there's going to be a reputation effect on those. A reputation effect in the sense that I can then tell the people I work with, that you're not to be trusted, and they might then stop having connections with you. So there's a bigger cost for you than in this situation. Here, if you're this person here, or you're this person here, actually, if I'm collaborating with you, if I'm working with you, if you run away with the money, there's no other consequences than that you run away with money. So from a sort of rational perspective, it might be making sense to do it here. It wouldn't make sense to do it here. So there's sort of, in this cohesive groups. And so remember the measures we talked about in the beginning, the cohesiveness measures, they're sort of measures that could be applied here to think about social capital as a group level measure. So these allow broader normative orders within which individuals can, if you think about organizations of people, can optimize their performance. It's the idea that there's basic norms that exist in society and that they're reinforced and they're checked all the time. So to give you an example of that, or to think about it in another way, think about Trump, the presidency of Trump. Now, up till Trump, there were a lot of rules about being a president that were not written down, that were not legally binding, but they were followed, and they were followed. There were sort of shared beliefs of what we can and what we can't do between Republicans and Democrats. Trump came in and basically destroyed quite a few of these rules. I mean, sorry, quite a few of the norms, the expectation that, you don't try to, you accept, for example, election outcomes. Trump didn't do that. Insurrection came, and so on and so on. There are all sort of norms that now the US is seeing like, okay, we need laws for this because we can't rely on the norms being followed by everyone. And why was this partly happening? It's partly happening because if you think about Trump being here and trying to be the free rider or trying to be anti-social or anti whatever the norms are, what is happening is that there's no control on him. And why is there no control on him? Because actually there's a split. Those that are linked with Trump, I can't show it here that much, but they're actually following Trump. So all the Republicans, not all the Republicans, but many of the GOP are now following Trump. And so there's no control over Trump because, all the Republicans, instead of saying, Donald Trump, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this, they're actually now saying, yes, the elections are stolen, yes, the elections are stolen. So they're becoming in this other social circle. So you have to think about this as sort of two groups now. One group where actually Trump and his allies are controlling the Republicans that are saying the elections are not stolen. So you get this other group where everyone is now controlling each other. And then you have the Democrats where everyone is trying to still make sure that the norms are followed, but it's not working. So I think this is an example where actually the ties and the norms are linked with each other. And so going back to social capital, remember what Coleman's talked about? So it's not only networks, it's also the norms. And that makes sense in this case. There's no, because Trump can be completely connected with other people that are also not following these norms anymore, the pressure is actually going for the Republicans. They're now one group. And then there's Democrats. And then the Republicans, basically, they control each other, that they're making sure that actually the norms are not followed from before. So if you're a Republican that actually says, no, we can't say that the election is stolen, we should be fair about these things, and we should be saying the election was not stolen, let's stop this. You're actually getting deselected. You're being controlled by the rest of the Republican Party. You're getting deselected and thrown out of the party, or make sure that you don't have any job anymore in there. So it's an example of actually closure working, but where there is a dynamic happening over time. Okay, this is my analysis, at least, of how I would see the things happening in the last years. And I think it's interesting to see that even though before, like even Bush, I know you're too young for this, but I still remember when, the young Bush Jr. was president. And, you thought like, okay, it's not going to be any worse than this. He's doing so many strange things. And then you get Trump and you see that society is being split up. Anyway, I think it's something completely interesting in itself. And I think networks could help you with this. Okay, so that was Coleman and a sort of closure. So let's take another person, and that's Ron Bird. And so Ron Bird is, so Coleman is a sociologist. Ron Bird is actually also a sociologist, but I would see him more as a manager scholar. So he was in Chicago If I'm not mistaken, he was with Harrison White at some point. So he was, I think, a PhD student of Harrison White, which you might know as sort of a name. And so he's in Columbia, Chicago. Sorry, Chicago. He said Columbia, Chicago. So he actually had this very famous idea. Although I have to say, actually, Romberg is really brilliant in social network analysis. He's done a lot more than what he's now famous for, which is structural holes. It's the one thing he's sort of preaching the most. And he's partly preaching, I mean, I'm using preaching on purpose because I think his father was a minister, so was a priest. So if you listen to him, he's very good at making his arguments. But so the idea he has is that, well, actually, let's take it from the opposite side. Let's look at it from a perspective of an individual that wants to get ahead. So let's look at social capital for C rather than social capital for the group. So let's not be concerned about norms. And okay, I'm going to exaggerate the points a little bit, right? I'm doing this on purpose because if you make it simple, it's more clear. There are nuances there that I don't want to put completely Romberg in one extreme situation, partly because I don't want the next time I meet him that he's angry about it. But the idea is really that, you know, let's take it more from a sort of selfish individualistic perspective, where you're trying to network. You're on purpose networking, you're behaving, you're actively searching for it. Now, the way he sees this, sorry, I'm not going to go to the next slide. Skip on this slide. I want to ask you, why do you think it would be better to be in this situation, to be C in this situation? So don't look at the next slide because that's just the answers. And can you remember some of the things we talked about before that might apply here? So why would it be better to be C, to be connected with 4 people that are themselves not connected, than to be A, to be connected with people that are themselves connected? So think about the classes, this class, the last class, the class before. Oops. I have to. Can you think about this situation where you have an open structure? Where have we seen this before? Yeah, so we're maximizing the resources we receive from others. And that's sort of related with Granovetter's strength of weak ties, right? So what we are doing is, instead of having this, if we would be Britney Spears here, we would have only our friends here, no other connections. Here, we are Britney Spears and we connect with different people that are different, that might have different resources. So the first argument we could make is that, well, maybe we're actually connected with different social circles. Yeah, so this is a social circle of cle hairdressers. This is a social circle that we're directly connected with that are like, I don't know, filmmakers. This is a social circle of, what could Britney do as well? Oh, Trump managers of Trump hotels. This is social circle of builders. And so you have different resources that each of these people bring with them. Here, because they're connected, they're more likely to be all having the same resources. They might all be singers, or they might all be builders, or all one or the other thing. And the problem with that is that that basically undermines your access to diversity of resources. Actually, some of the things that Romberg talks about before, and we'll come back to this in one of the next lectures, is about the range, diversity of resources that you have access to. So that's one thing. Of course, that's inconsistent with the idea of Granovetter, right? If you have resources here, you know, why is there no connection here? If they're really good connection, if this is a strong connection, why are there no connections here? Well, Ron Bird doesn't completely agree with Granovetter that strong ties have to have a weak tie. You know, in effect, he says that it's better to be connected with others that have strong ties who are not connected with each other. Yeah? So think about it as your friends. You have a friend who has a lot of knowledge about music. You have a friend who knows a lot about computers. You have a friend who knows a lot about, you know, cooking. And you have another friend that knows a lot about, what did I not say yet? Taste of clothing. Yeah. And so you have these different friends and you do different things with each of these friends. So the idea is that that's a good thing. Here, you would have all of these friends, they may be all cooks, but you only need one cook. You don't need four cooks to teach you to cook or to help you to improve your cooking. I'm not saying that your cooking is bad, I'm just saying improving your cooking. So that's one argument. So that's related with Granovetter, right? Think about betweenist centrality. What did we do when we talked about betweenist centrality? What was the argument? First of all, is A in betweenist higher in betweenist centrality or C? Which one is higher in betweenist centrality? C, right? C is high in betweenist centrality. A is really low in betweenist centrality. Actually, there's betweenist centrality 0 here. So what would C get from that? What was important about betweenist centrality? It's about flow of resources between others, between the people that you're connected with. If I'm connecting this blue one and this blue one, I should give them a name, but these two, you can negotiate between people whether something flows through the network, right? Yeah. So you can decide whether something goes between them. Here, they have connections themselves. So you're not a unique gatekeeper or broker, yeah, in between them. And so Bird would say this is a structural whole because if it's structural, because it's a network characteristic, and it's a whole because if I remove C, there's an emptiness left. C is really important in linking between the other people. Here, if A disappears, nobody really cares from a perspective of flow of information because they still go on with their daily job of just talking with each other. It's a big difference between A's. Now, one other argument we can take is Simul. And Simul talked about this control mechanism, right? So what was happening here is you avoid that someone can be free rider because you can control that together with others in the group that this person is not free riding. But what if you want to be the free rider? You're also controlled. You also can't do anything that's against whatever the other people want. So you can't get ahead sometimes. Here, you can negotiate, you can not negotiate, you can basically, you can get away with a lot of stuff because the only thing they can do is control you or try to control you directly as one person. Not a lot of things, not a lot of consequences. And so from that perspective, you could say, well, actually, C is better off because C can use his networks for whatever he wants to do or she wants to do. Here, A can use his networks, but only to follow the rules of the group. And so if you want to be a free rider, if you want to use your networks for your benefits, for free riding, so for doing whatever is good for you, which is bad for the other people, you can do it here. The only thing will happen is maybe you lose some friends, but you can build new friendships. Here, think about a small community, you can't get away. Yeah, you will have to leave and go to another community to survive. So that's a big difference between these two situations here. So there's sort of three arguments. There's the Simmel argument. There's no control of individuals. I mean, there is control, but there's not, the control is not as strong as if they would be connected with each other. There's the negotiation between each other, the between centrality argument, and there's the Granovetter argument. You get access to unique information from different groups. You could imagine that actually these four people, they all are part of a group of people, of a social circle. That's a unique social circle because they're not connected with each other. So they're different social circles. So you get access to unique information, unique resources, things like that. Is that okay? So that's Rombert's argument simplified. And so you could say, well, he's looking really at the individual as someone that wants to get ahead, that wants to get better out of his networks or her networks. And that's actually true. He looks at managers specifically, managers in organizations and how they can get higher wages or get promoted faster if they have an open structure, or if they're in a structure whole than if they're in a closed structure. And he consistently finds this. This has been one of his main arguments in the last 30 years almost. So that's one of the things. Rombert has talked about other stuff, and we'll come back to this later on. But this is one of his main, one of the main things where he's famous for. Structure holes. If you Google structure holes, you'll find Rombert. You find a lot of papers that sort of try to replicate this. It's been a hype, and I think it's been a bit overhyped. But okay, that's my personal view. It's like, you know, at some point you're like, okay, do we need another study on this to show the same thing? Anyway, one extension of that has been what's called Gould and Fernandez brokerage positions. It's actually a paper by Fernandez and Gould that was looking at what if we look at brokerage positions, gatekeepers, but we distinguish between in-group and out-group. So let me explain this in this way. So imagine that maybe you have three organizations or something. So here, the person in the middle is always the one that's sort of white, right? And the two black nodes are the ones that are the sender. So now it has direction here. So it's sort of like this person gives information to the white person here that gives it to the nodes, the black node here. Sorry, the white node. Yeah, is that okay? Now we can differentiate between whether these three people are in the same organization, whether they're in different organizations, and if so, where they are in that organization. So let's take this one first. Here, the information goes from people in another organization to the person here in this organization, and this person spreads it to people inside the organization. So it's a gatekeeper in the sense that it's the gatekeeper for the city inside. Yeah, it's the gates of the city. Or in the organizational context, it's like, you know, it's a person that's really important for getting information from outside, gathering it, and then spreading it around in the organization or in the group. I'm talking about an organization, but it could be other types of things as well. This is something where these nodes have something in common that makes them sort of, you know, wanting to spread information with each other. Here, it's a representative. Why? This person is collecting information from inside and then representing it to outside. It's like a PR almost. It's like this person is saying to the outside world what the inside organization is thinking. Here you have a cosmopolitan. Sometimes it's also called itinerant or consultant. And so what's happening here is that basically you have the person that's outside of the organization linking people inside the organization. So imagine that you're a group of students and you have to work together on something, and you know, someone outside sort of talks with one and then talks with the other and sort of ensures that information is going faster through the group. So it's an external person that actually makes the flow inside faster. That's why it's a sort of consultant. Consultants, what they often do is they go to a company and they try to see where are the weaknesses, who's not talking with whom, and or who's not sharing information with other people inside the organization. Well, they identify that and they fix it, and then so they basically, in this case, they sort of would share that information through. So originally it was called Cosmopolitan. Later on, its consultant was sort of used more. And the liaison is basically a person that interacts between different groups. It's like now you have 3 groups, and the person in the 3rd group basically links the one group with the other group. So it's like 3 different groups. Is that okay? These are all the types of brokerage positions that you can have in a situation like this with 3 people. And so it could be interesting to look at to what extent there is a person that takes the role of a representative or a gatekeeper or a coordinate. So if I think about the student representative, is the student representative actually really doing a representative job or doing more a gatekeeping job? Right? It's information coming into the group of students from the outside. Or is it linking 2 groups of students? So is it the liaison? Liaison can also sometimes be thought about a cosmopolitan as a sort of someone that negotiates between people when they're in conflict, right? So you could have similar ideas in that. Okay, so that's sort of Gould and Fernandez approach to this. So it's an extension of sort of brokerage positions and Ron Bird's structural. Now, as I said, there was a 3rd person, as I said yesterday, there's a 3rd person who actually disagreed with both of these. And so David Krackhart is another famous he's actually a management scholar, but I would say he's close to being a sociologist. He did his PhD at UCI, at University of California, Irvine, came into contact with networks there. And so what is his idea? His idea is basically that he says, well, whether you're in this position or this position, that's both okay. But here's what really is the worst situation you can be in. And so what he did is he's a business person, so he looks at management business, he's in a business school, but he's also an anthropologist. And so what he did is, when he does network analysis, he tends to go to the company, and he tends to go and look and actually participate in the company to understand more what is going on there. And so here's an example of, he called it Silicon Systems. It was in Silicon Valley, but it was not Silicon Systems, a company. It has a different name. But he basically looked at this company, and he was interested in what are the dynamics that are going on here. So he had a friendship network here. And so it's directed because I might think I'm friends with you, but you don't agree that you're a friend. But the interesting thing that happened here was that actually in this company, so, okay, you have to know this is in the US. In the US, if you want to build a union, you have to get a majority of the employees to actually vote for a union. Yeah? So that's sort of the general rule that exists in the US. It's different than in Europe. And so actually there was this vote coming up of whether they were going to have a union or not. And unlike in Europe, a union in the US is also sometimes seen as a bit more conflict-based. I mean, it has to do with history and unions in the 1920s and things like that. It's a whole story there. I can't go into detail there. But so what was happening is basically there was this pro-union people. I put them in with green circles. There was this anti-union people, and there was these sort of top managers. And now, one of the things you have to know is that, and this is how Krackaert actually talks about it, is that Chris is a very central person. Chris is the person that everyone would listen to. So if after work they would go to the pub, Chris would be the one that would be always talking. Everyone would listen to him. Everyone would like, Chris, tell us another story, these sort of things. Yeah. Now I'm repeating what Krackaert has told me. I mean, has told in a few times in his stories, right? It's also in the paper, but sometimes he makes it a little bit more juicy than it is. So Chris would be, everyone would be listening to Chris and would be really paying attention, of course. But then this unionization came about, and so the vote came, like was in the next month. And what happened actually is that Chris became more and more silent. And Chris became, instead of being the center of attention after work, he basically sat in a corner in the pub, and basically didn't want to speak too much. And so Krackaert argues that, well, what's happening actually here is that Chris was in a difficult situation. Why? Because Chris had two opposing groups of people. He had his friends who were really pro-union. He was also himself pro-union, but he also had his friends that were anti-union. And they were like groups of people, right? It's like Simmelian control. There was Simmelian control from this group to say, Chris, come on, you're smart. You're not going to vote for the union, right? That's going to destroy the whole company. We're having a great time here. Look at us. Why should we have a union? And then there were these people that were saying, come on, Chris. I mean, we know you're pro-union. Just, be vocal about it. Tell other people why we should join the union. But Chris felt, okay, that's too much pressure. There's the one group, my one set of friends who don't want me to support this. The other group of friends who are pushing me to really officially endorse a union. And so Chris became silent. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, I've heard the story a few times. I think he called in sick even at some point, just before the vote, because he felt like the pressure was too much. And so what was happening here is what Krackaert calls Simmelian ties. Simmelian ties because, I mean, it's following Simmel, of course. You have groups of people that can pressure you. You have another group of people that pressure you. But you had a really difficult situation. Oh, I have to go back. Because you have one group having one expectation, and here another group having another expectation. And they're both groups. So imagine you're in the middle of the exam, some people knock on the door and say, come on, let's go, a group of your friends say, come on, let's go to the pub. And then another group of friends say, knock on the door and say, come on, let's study. And you're sort of in a conflict situation. Now, that's what Krackaert argues, that you have two groups and they have opposing expectations of you. That's worse than this, because here you have one group, it's a clear expectation. You just follow it and you're happy. Just do whatever they want. Follow the rules of the game, follow the rules of society. Here, okay, there are different people having different expectations, but they don't control you. So that's fine too. So you're happy here, here you're really into a stress situation. So Krackaert would argue, what's the best position? Actually, this is the worst position. Romburt would say this is the best position. Coleman would say this is a good position to be in because you can actually make sure that things are followed, that the society is working, and that you can live inside a society without fear that someone will backstab you all the time. Is that okay? So that's basically Krackaert, David Krackaert, Romburt, and James Coleman. So two of these people are still alive. So James Coleman died quite a few years ago, but both of these are still alive. So you know, they still have YouTube videos that you can find when I'm. Okay, good. So having done that, when I was waiting a little bit to see how far I would go with this, we should have a bit more, right? Yeah. So I have some more slides. So give me 2 minutes or 1 minute for me to upload these slides. And then we will go over the second part. And so I'm stopping sharing and I will upload this first. I think that will be okay for today. Okay, it's uploaded. So now I have to do a few steps. Here. Right there. Share the screen. Sharing smaller. Okay. So shall we start? Okay, it's not that much, but as I remembered yesterday, I was thinking about, oh, we talked about Granovetter, but we are not talking about small worlds. So remember, Granovetter was talking about this sort of like, you know, the social circles and connections between social circles, right? Now, a more recent set of studies have looked at this from a sort of small world perspective. And so this is related with the concept of 6 degrees of separation. So who can tell me what 6 degrees of separation is? And don't get upset if I disagree with you. Okay, that makes you not want to answer anymore. Okay, what is 6 degrees of separation as we commonly know it in society, as we you know, in sort of the way people have been using it? Does anyone know, or is it something that you're not very familiar with?
Well, according to common theory, it should be that concept that every person in the world is reachable to any other person in this world through 6 kind of steps. So a person is a person, and if you go that 6 times, then you could, in theory, reach everyone.
Everyone, yes, and maximum 6 steps, or yeah, yes. This is really the common way in which people have been using it, and it's actually the way that it's also been argued actually in some of the scientific papers. I want to make a few notes on that and I come back to this, but do you know where this comes from? Do you know the classic study? So this is sort of the idea that if you take 2 people in the world, just 2 random people in the world, they will at most be 6 steps away from each other. Now the question is, of course, 6 steps on what? That's the first thing. What is it? Acquaintances. When are you acquaintance? That's the first thing that makes it a bit more difficult. But yeah. So, do you know the Stanley Milgram small worlds experiment? So what he did is, or what his group did, is they randomly selected people in Nebraska and 2 other places in the US. And they asked them, and they sent them some package or letter. It's not completely clear to me if it's a letter or a package, but they asked them to send this package to a person in Boston, but they couldn't send it immediately to them. They needed to give it to someone who they knew by first name, who then had to give it to someone who they know by first name, who then knew someone by first name, and so on. So the acquaintances here, the acquaintances ideas here, you need to know the person by first name. On first name basis, it's actually stronger than that. It's not that you need to know the name, but you need to actually be able to say to this person, like, you know, you can talk with this person if, on a first name basis. Yeah. And when they did that, they actually found out that on average, the paths it took for this parcel, for this package to reach the person in Boston, it was 5.5. I should say the average path for receiving the package was 5.5 among the packages that were delivered to this person. So there's 2 problems with this. First of all, it's actually average here, not maximum, because some of the packages were never delivered, because basically what the person had to do is had to decide which person should I give it to among my connections. And then that person had to decide which person should I give it to, so that I make it most likely that it ends up with this person that they defined in Boston. So many actually were never reached. And so this study has been used, and there's a whole discussion about how well the study actually really gives an indication of 6 degrees of separation. So one of the things is that maybe it's the average that's 6. And why is it the average and not the maximum? Well, imagine, I'm going to be really extreme here. Imagine that in the Amazons, there's some tribe that nobody of us know about. That we don't know that exists. And these tribes don't know that the rest of the world exists. If that's the case, and we take someone from the tribe and we take one of you, it will not be 6, it will be infinity, right? So it's a very strong statement to say it's the maximum is 6, because what we need for a maximum is really, we need a lot of data to say that the maximum is 6. Any moment that we have a step 7 is a disproof of that statement. If we say the average is 6, however, then we could say, well, okay, you know, that could be true, and you know, we sort of have maybe a bit of error there, but yes, the average is 6. That's something where, you know, we might not be impacted so much by just one case having extreme high or low. Yeah? Maybe the mode or the median actually being 6 might be even better. So I am not going to say whether it's right or wrong, yeah, because I do not know. I think what is important is that there is discussion about whether it's the average or the maximum. And that if you say the maximum, you really have to be careful about this idea that maybe there's an Amazon tribe that's there. Of even, you know, even if there's a few connections that are 8 away, that's still inconsistent with the argument that you're making. So maybe what really should be said is maybe the average is some level. So maybe the average is some 6, or maybe it's less, maybe it's 4. You know, and then there's been studies that sort of with Facebook have been arguing, well, the average is actually lower than that because of online and so on and so on. Yeah. Okay, I don't want to go into detail here because I think that there's a lot of methodological questions here that you have to ask. How did they study this thing and how did it study that? What was acquaintances? Was it first name basis? Was it something else? And you end up with a whole discussion about it. So I'm not going to go into too much detail on this. Yeah, I just wanted to mention that there is quite a bit of discussion about this statement. In sort of, you know, the common language in the sort of, you know, in the world out there, the non-scientific world, it's sort of the idea it's maximum 6. Some scientists agree with that, some others would not agree with that. Some say it's now less because of Facebook, because we travel more and these sort of things. But what's important is, how do we come to this small world situation? Yeah, because 6 is quite low. Whether it's an average or a maximum, it's still quite low. And this is where Duncan Watts and others have been arguing, okay, one other example of the 6 degrees of separation is the Kevin Bacon game that you might know. It's like, how many steps does it take to for a player, for an actor in a movie to be connected with Kevin Bacon, where you connected directly with Kevin Bacon. If you played with Kevin Bacon, you connected, I mean, two actors are connected with each other if they immediately connect, if they played with each other, right? So for example, Bob Odenkirk is 3 steps away, it seems, from Kevin Bacon, because Bob Odenkirk played with Rhea Seehorn, who played in Better Call Saul, and she played with Kira in The Closer, and Kira is apparently married with Kevin Bacon. Now, that's not a network tie that we normally look at, but okay, marriage apparently is also something. So George Clooney is 2 steps away, for example, and so on and so on. Yeah. Okay. So why do we have a small world? Well, one argument has been that there's 2 important aspects for a small world. There is a clustering level that's high, and that's the first thing. So in society, there's high levels of clustering. Yeah. So we don't have a world like this. We tend to live in a world where there's high levels of clustering, like Granovetter was talking about, high levels of clustering. Yeah. And now but we don't only have a high level of clustering, but we have a low average geodesic distance. How do we get there? Well, so if you take all the dyads and we take the average geodesic distance, remember from what we did with cohesion measures, we would have a low average distance. How do we get there? We get there by just changing a few of the ties. So if we start with this network, high clustered, yeah, so it's one network, it's the world, yeah, it's my little world of people. If I just move around a few ties, I'm already reducing the average geodesic distance a lot, because remember, average geodesic distance here between these people is going to be 1, but the average geodesic distance between these people is really high. It's actually infinity. But now I'm already connecting 2 groups here twice. If I do a few more, now my average geodesic distance has really decreased quite a bit, right? So I just changed 4 ties, and by changing 4 ties, I already reduced the geodesic distance incredibly a lot. If I do a few more, my geodesic distance decreases even more, because here Still, for this node to be connected with this node, it takes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 steps. Okay, there's some that are 1, but there's some that are 10 still. Here, it takes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 steps, or 6 steps. So notice a few changes in number of ties, the few changes in where ties are makes a very clustered network into a clustered network with a low geodesic distance, average geodesic distance. And that's what's called a small world. It's a small world because if you look at this network here, if you take any of the people in there, I think the average geodesic distance is probably something like 3. Here it was still a lot higher. First of all, because you have infinity there. Here it's still high, so it decreases quite a bit. That's noticeable. Yeah, it's a lot, but you also have this clustering, and this clustering helps for groups. And so there's links between these groups, which in Granovetter's world would be what? What type of ties do they have to be here? Weak ties, right? So Granovetter would say these have to be weak ties. They connect between social circles. So 20 years later, small worlds come up. It's actually a similar concept, but where we don't take into account the strength of the tie. We're just looking at the structure. We basically say there's a high clustering, and then there's a few connections between them. So how does this work? So think about your friends or your connections, and think about whether you would be able to get a connection in, what was it, Nebraska, I think it is. So do you think, how long do you think it would take for you to, through acquaintances, some people that you at least know on first name basis, through this, to their people and so on, to get to someone in Nebraska? And I think generally what you will do is one of two things. It will either be that you will think about someone that knows someone in the US, or you would think immediately about someone in the US. And notice what you're doing is basically you have your local social circle here, your local group. And then you have a few people that might be international. They might, for example, this might be an international person who, is Italian but lives in the US. Or it might be someone that's American that lives in Milan, for example. And so, and you might have met them at a party. So what you have is these ties are generally because some people have moved between social circles. Or you might have traveled to the US, or you might have gone for summer school somewhere, and you might have met someone somewhere, and language school or something, you might have met them from some other place. So you only need a few of these connections to make this group, like think about your group here, to make your group connected with a lot of other places, other nationalities. Because either you know someone, or maybe some of the people in the group might know someone in China, for example, or in Australia, or things like that. Yeah? And that's a small world idea. It's the idea that basically you have a cohesive group of people that makes you have a lot of direct connections, that allows you to then, through them, have a lot of connections. I only put 2 people here that have like connections outside the group, but imagine that each of these people have like 2 other connections to other groups. That makes you, as a group, in 2 steps, be able to reach a lot of different other groups already. And then if these have also quite a few of these connections, I mean, quite a few, relatively speaking small, but then you can get towards a lot of other people in 4 steps and so on. Yeah, that's a small worlds idea. Is that okay? So small worlds, 2 parts, clustering, because if they wouldn't be clustering, then the ties are not being used efficiently. Basically, there's a lot of alternative ways of going from where to another place, but they're not very efficient in this one. Here, they're very efficient because you're clustering. That makes you get access to inside your group to a lot of people that have connections outside that you can use. Okay, so that's the small world idea. It's in some ways not very different from Granovetter. A lot of people think it's a very new concept. No, Granovetter actually talked about it already. The only difference is he talked about weak ties and strong ties and about clustering, forbidden trying principle. Here, there's the additional aspect of you have connections between these different groups. Okay, is that okay? I have one more thing I want to go over, and that's key player. We mentioned this, so Steve talked about it briefly in his lecture. So what is key player? Key player idea is the question, if I have a network, and this is sort of my little bug network. I like this network because it looks like a bug. If you have this network, and I would ask you, if I would ask you to give information to one person, so that it reaches as many people as possible in exactly one step. So let's make it very simple. We want to know, we want to reach as many people as possible in exactly one step. So not more than one step. So it's not closeness centrality, it's actually degree centrality in some ways, but it's a variant of this. So if I want to choose one person so that it reaches as many people as possible, who would I choose here? 7, right? And that's actually because we choose the one with the highest degree. That's a simple solution. If I asked you one person and I say, and you want to get the direct connections to be impacted, then you choose the person with the highest degree. Because what you're saying is, imagine that I can give one person an iPhone. I give this for free, but I want to maximize the number of people that will buy an iPhone. And the people that will buy an iPhone are the people that are directly connected with the person that gets the iPhone for free. Yeah? Because if they see someone with an iPhone, they will also want to have this iPhone. But it's only direct. It's not like, and then these people impact other and so on. No, it's just a direct, very simple situation. Okay, 7. Now my question is, what if you can choose 2 people and you want to maximize the number of unique people that are going to be impacted? So if a person and another person are chosen, so 2 people are chosen, and they both are connected with another person, that only counts as 1. That doesn't count as 2, because this person is only being impacted. He's already had a virus, so to speak, by one of the 2 people. So the second one doesn't have any additional thing, because also this person is going to buy the iPhone only once. It's not because 2 people got the iPhone for free that I will buy the phone twice, right? So who would I choose if I have to choose 2 people? Which 2 people would I choose? So you might think, oh, I just choose 7 and 16. But that's actually not the optimal. And the reason why it's not optimal is because 7 and 16 have a number of shared connections. And so shared connections mean redundant. They're not helpful. So I need to choose 2 others. There's an optimal solution that's better than that. So if I use 1, 7 is the best solution. But if I have 2, it's not 7 and 16. It's not the highest degree and then second highest degree. It's actually a solution. Yes, 9 and 4 might be, or 9 and 2. That's a good question. Which of the 2 is it? So let's see. If I do 9 and 4, I think I reach more people than if I use 9 and 2. Yeah, good. So you see, the optimal solution is not the same as the 2 nodes with the highest degree. So what if I have 3 that I can choose? You might think, oh, I just add 16. No, well, I wouldn't add 16. I might add one other, but that's, you know, any of these that I choose in addition to this is not going to have more optimal. Yeah, because I only choose these people, 1 person extra. There's a better solution. If I choose 3 people, yes, 2, 12, and 60. Because now I actually reach everyone except 18. So now just choosing 3 people, give them 3 people an iPhone. And if all the friends of the people that get an iPhone actually, buy an iPhone, I'm getting a lot of profit. Yeah, so I'm actually changing it again. This is on purpose. This is an example where things change all the time. It doesn't, in real networks, it doesn't always change that much. So what if we do 4? Well, if we do 4, that, I can just choose 18. There's nothing more to do there, right? But that's a key player problem question. That's a key player problem or question in a positive way. It's trying to influence as many people with a certain number of people to start off with. So some people are chosen, certain number, how many are being impacted, and which would we choose so that we impact the most? Is that okay? Key player. This is the key player in a positive way. The key player in a negative way was what Steve was actually talking about. It's where we want to break the network in the most number of ways, or break them in a number of components. And so this was these negative induced centrality, the induced centrality thing. So if I think about which nodes would I want to make disappear so that my network breaks down? Okay, let me ask you, if I would choose 1 person, can I break down the network? I can. I can choose, for example, 2. And now I break down my network into 3 groups, 3 components. Or I can choose 12. Actually, if I choose 2, I would probably choose 2 and 12. Because that gives me 5 components. But what if I can choose 3? And I want the components to be sort of equal size. I don't want isolates, because isolates, they still have this big component. I want to reduce the largest component the most by using 3, by removing 3 nodes. What if I remove 7 and 9 and 4? If I do that, so I'm just improvising here. I actually don't know the answer because I didn't think about this before. But if I do this, and I remove this, and I remove this, I now have a group that's this. I have a group that's this. And I still have a group, but this group is, actually this one is an isolate. And now I have a group that's this group here. Maybe that's the optimal solution. I do not know for sure. 9, 7, and 4. Yes. Okay. And all right, that's exactly the same thing as I. So good. Sorry, I didn't see that. Yeah. So these are the type of things you can do with thinking about fragmenting the network or trying to influence as much as possible. Now we have done this with sort of direct connections only, but you can think about this from closeness centrality as well. So you can think about, what if I, larger network, what if I want to have 3 people, so I maximize the impact of the network, not only direct connections, but also indirect connection, where there's a decay in this. So this is an extension of sort of the centrality measures, where we are interested in not just one node, but multiple nodes, a combination. It's a combination problem. Is that okay? Good. I think that should be it for today. Thank you for attending. And we will see each other hopefully in person next week. I'm still pretty convinced I will be a little better. Yeah. So we see each other next week on Wednesday in person. Yeah. Okay.